Welcome to Leadership in Lockdown, our video series talking to people from across higher education and early talent about how they're handling leadership within the current kind of coronavirus crisis and challenge we all find ourselves working in. It's obviously a challenging time for everyone, and leaders in all sorts of organisations are facing challenges in their individual organisations, but also in their sectors and whilst also balancing professional, personal life as well. So we're hoping to just gather insights and ideas from people around the sector. And today we're really delighted to welcome Chris Millward, who's the Director of Fair Access and Participation at the Office for Students, to join us. Thanks for joining us, Chris. How are you doing? Are you well?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah.
Excellent. Wanted to just chat to you obviously today a bit about leadership in this kind of environment. What have you found to be maybe the biggest challenges of leadership in this kind of new world, this sort of new normal?
Okay. Well, at one level, we've had to, as the regulator of higher education, had to make some difficult decisions about our education of universities and colleges. We've had to change our expectations of universities and colleges, really boil that down to the most important issues in this environment, like protecting students, maintaining quality and standards, financial health of universities. So we've actually had to make some very difficult decisions quickly, and we've had to communicate that fairly clearly and carefully so that everybody understands them, because it will affect behaviour out in the sector and ultimately the experience for students. We've also had to make those decisions whilst navigating other parties with an interest, particularly government. So the big leadership challenge initially for us was rapidly making really important decisions, making sure the people who needed to know were involved in that, and then communicating it really clearly to the sector. So that's the kind of more outward-facing challenge. I think a more internal challenge, and I'm sure other people will say this, is all of the ways of making decisions and engaging with staff that you're used to are not happening now. So briefing our staff, getting their views, asking them to do work, asking them to change their work quite fundamentally, all of that is having to happen or online essentially rather than face to face, and you just don't have the benefit of the human contact, the kind of little insights you get from face to face contact. So in many ways they're all more difficult conversations to have.
Yeah. How would you say you've kind of adapted to deal with those kind of different things as the things you've learned along the way over the last 6-8 weeks, I guess, to kind of develop that both?
Yeah. So again, let me pick up the two themes, the big decisions we had to take, and then the internal engagement with staff. On the first one, we as a management team from the outset, and really for the first 2 or 3 weeks of the pandemic and the lockdown, met every morning for an hour. So we all got together 8:30 to 9:30 every morning. That started with a review of the landscape, what's coming out of the government briefings, what are we picking up from the sector and from students, and then quite quickly we structured our work during the coronavirus into a series of work streams which we reviewed every day. Say, okay, what are we trying to achieve with this? What's happening on it? So we very quickly set up a structure for us to meet in a group, identify the things we need to do, make decisions and progress all of that. And then we also, within our own parts of the organisation, worked out how we were going to then translate those central management meetings into action out in our areas, making sure people were properly briefed. So I think that very rapid restructuring of our meeting cycle, decision-making processes, communication processes was really key. I think on the day-to-day level, working with staff and indeed colleagues in government and in the sector, there is just an overhead with having to work harder to communicate.
Yeah.
So I am doing a lot of Teams calls,
Yeah.
both one-to-one with groups of staff, probably more than I would, more frequent structured meetings and contact than I would do normally, because that's the way of keeping in touch. So it's a different way of working.
Yeah, I think we've picked up a lot of people almost missing the water cooler, the kind of informal corridor conversations, and then trying to kind of, it almost feels like you're overstructuring that. If you arrange a Teams meeting just to have an informal chat, but somehow you've got to pick these things up, haven't you, along the way?
Yeah, and I think in our kind of sector and our kind of organisations, a number of people rely on informal intelligence.
Absolutely.
Picked up in the margins of meetings and gatherings, and that's just not happening. So you've got to work harder to stay in touch, I think.
You really do. I think that's really important. I guess if you look more externally, are there kind of examples of leadership you've seen in either public life or either perhaps around you in your team, or things that you think actually that's been really positive how they've done it, or maybe the other side of the coin, things that you think actually that's really not how you should be communicating in this kind of time?
I think I have seen. I think we've been careful about what issues we try to tackle in the short term. For example, in relation to performance management, and how we tackle them. And I'm not sure that, and I've seen some kind of weak examples of how that's being dealt with. In the current situation.
I guess in terms of, you're splitting your time between a whole bunch of things. You're having those regular meetings. You're trying to keep build intelligence, but also kind of manage really clear comms in a very complex sector. How are you splitting your time between thinking about the kind of maybe the immediate, burning platforms that are there, and the kind of thinking about, okay, what does 2021 look like in this environment, and that more future scoping bit?
Yeah. So we have quite deliberately structured our work into what we call kind of red and amber and black work strands. So red is the immediate work we're doing to manage the coronavirus situation, engagement with the sector, with government, with students, on all of that, structured into a number of work streams that we know are the most important. And we are putting all of our staff resource onto that work, all the staff resource that's needed for that work, and reprioritising that. We know also that there are, longer term goals we still want to pursue. And that relates both to kind of underpinning work that we do for the sector. For example, we produce data and gather data and produce analysis on issues. We're doing a lot of work to improve evaluation in my area, for example. The work that I'm doing with universities is about 5-year plans to shift equality in relation to access and participation. So we still want to get back to that when we can. So we're still, where we've got the staff resource, putting time into those areas where we call them amber areas. And it's quite important that we make staff feel that they're just as important, that it's important that we continue with that longer running work. There are also then inevitably, having put more staff resource into the red areas, activities we're now labelling black, we just can't do at the moment. And those we're just we're putting on pause for a minute. I think one of the interesting things is, and this may come on to something you're going to talk about, is we're not assuming that as we fade out of this, everything will be the same. We'll just go back to where we were. The nations, the government policy in some areas will be quite different, I suspect, because we'll be looking at national recovery, and of course, a whole set of economic issues as public service issues that will influence what happens, and we won't be immune from that. So part of our work at the moment is about starting to have some foresight about what might the world look like in the autumn, and what might our role be, and how should we regulate in that environment, rather than just assume it's, you know, switching off and back on again.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, isn't it? This kind of wrestling between the idea of, I think some people are just almost hoping that we will at some point just go back to totally as it was before, but actually reality around that is unlikely, and therefore what does this kind of new stage look like? I guess, what do you see as the thinking in that kind of mid to long term bracket? What do you see as the particular challenges, but maybe also the opportunities for higher education in particular, I guess, in that kind of mid to long term?
Yeah.
Now in this environment.
Okay. So I think, let me say something first about the character of English higher education. So, you know, I think we're really fortunate in this country that we have universities that have, you know, some of the brightest students and staff from all around the world. And I think, of course, they're important financially to universities, and that's a big source of discussion at the moment. But actually, they're important to the culture of universities, and benefit both when they're here and when they go back to their home countries. I really want us to get back to whatever happens in the next year about international student participation in this country. We really must get back to that. You know, international, open, a magnet of higher education that we've got in this country. So I don't want that to change. But equally, universities will have to think about how they can make that work, given whatever constraints there are on mobility, and indeed a different appetite from people in different countries to come here or leave their own country. So I think there's a set of issues about how we remain a global higher education sector. We continue to get the best minds in the world studying here and working here and helping our teaching and research effort, but do it in a way that you know, reflects the world that we'll be in at that point, and perhaps the different attitudes in different countries. I think alongside that, clearly what we've seen during this period is a terrific spirit of partnership, locally and nationally. So we are seeing, and it's, you know, being reported to me, universities, further education colleges, NHS trusts, local authorities, you know, anchor businesses in areas working really closely together to get through this as part of the local resilience effort. And I'm interested in how that partnership, particularly in local areas, can help us in the next phase. So in terms of, you know, the training that will be needed for people, you know, people might need to change work. We might have to expect to have more adults engaging in higher education and further education and retraining. How we get the economy going as well, how we ensure good jobs for graduates as they're flowing through the system this year. So those partnerships are going to be really key, and keeping those partnerships going, not just as a one-off response to this, I think will be important. I think, I mean, two other areas that are part of my immediate remit and my work. On the one hand, you know, I'm quite closely involved in health and medical education, and there was already a big push to expand the number of nurses and potentially more doctors as well for the health service. And I hope we can ride the back of this and the great public support for the health service to encourage more people to work in those sectors, and indeed to help it become even more a sector that people want to work in and thrive in. The other issue to highlight is it's pretty widely thought, and there's good evidence about this already, that you know, some of the inequalities that we see in relation to education at all stages of the educational cycle, from early years through to primary and secondary and into higher education, they could be compounded during all of this. We're seeing inequality of cases of coronavirus. We're seeing inequality in relation to the degree to which students in schools are accessing resources and getting support. We know that, you know, the students who might most need to work while they study because they come from low income families and higher education are not having jobs at the moment, so there's hardship issues with all of that. I think there's good widespread recognition of that, and we will need to work to ensure that that doesn't make inequality worse at the end of it. So that the recognition turns into tangible action over the coming years, and the progress we've actually been making on reducing inequality, we get back to improving the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's vital. Like you say, it's some of those things feel like they've been entrenched, don't they, by this kind of situation. It's going to be important to almost like double down in the effort in those areas, whether social mobility or whatever. So great. Okay, well, we'll just I guess drawing to a close, but there's obviously positives and negatives in this whole situation. I guess what are the positive things that you hope will stick around and maybe become lasting changes in our work and lives, not just necessarily in the sector, but generally?
I think the spirit of partnership, the willingness to be practical and change and be positive about solving problems during this period, I hope will continue with, and that applies to people working with me in my organisation, but of course in the wider world. The positive attitude towards supporting the most disadvantaged in society. I hope we'll be able to stick with that and seriously address it. The positive attitude towards public services, particularly healthcare, those are going to be really important into the future. We are going to need plans locally and nationally to recover from this, given what we're seeing about the potential impact on jobs and the economy, for example. And that will mean that we can't just see, people providing education, people employing people, private and public sectors as all separate parties. They're going to need to work together to be able to address this.
Yeah, absolutely. That kind of wider ecosystem sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just return to one of your previous questions? So,
by all means,
you asked me what I thought had been good during all this, and I think the BBC News has been really good. I've been really struck by how the BBC News has been able to, present really difficult and upsetting facts, which we all need to know about, explain some of the complexities well, with people who understand the detail but are translating it well, but also make it human. So there are just some wonderful case studies I've seen on the 10 o'clock news almost every night, whether it's people working in hospitals, people working in care homes, people caring in their own homes, that just turn the statistics into real life experiences, which is just so important. So I've been hugely impressed by that. The other thing is they have tried also to reflect, not in a kind of sentimental or cliched way, how we are together responding positively to this through the use of music, through the use of films of us on our doorsteps on Thursday nights, etc. So I think it has been a period in which public broadcasting, and of course many other people have said this as well, but public broadcasting has been needed and I think has done well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, like you say, everything from things like those montage songs or through to just kind of that advert they've got around at the moment saying one day we'll be all talking about more positive things together. It's actually it's actually quite a powerful message, isn't it? That this will end, and that even though it feels pretty tough for everybody right now. So that's a real balance to strike, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Chris. We really value your time, and I know you've got a lot on, so appreciate you making time for this. Thanks to those of you who've watched this. I hope you found it useful and insightful. Keep an eye out for future Leadership in Lockdown sessions, and stay healthy, and we'll hopefully see you again. Thanks.